Hi, David Ellenstein here, Artistic Director of North Coast Repertory Theatre. Thank you for tuning in today to our theater conversations. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. That would help us out a lot. Thank you. It's my pleasure today to welcome my friend and colleague, Andy Barnacle, to have a conversation with. Hi, Andy.
Hi, David. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
So for those of you that don't know, Andy's got many claims to fame, but he was the artistic director of the Laguna Playhouse for nearly 20 years, where he took that company from being a semi-professional company to being a full Lort B theater in the course of his tenure there. And aside from that, he's been a freelance director all over the place, as well as an actor who's worked everywhere from New York to every part of this country, pretty much. And years before a lot of that, he was the associate artistic director at the North Coast Repertory Theatre, back when it was in its inception with Olive Blackistone running it. Andy kind of came in and assisted her and kind of made it happen with her at its beginnings. So Andy, first thing I wanted to ask you, how did you get started in the theater? What turned you on about theater? You didn't come from a theater family, I don't think. So how did you get involved in this craziness?
I think it was I had a troubled youth, and I was in high school, and I got cast in the lead in a play. My very first play I got cast as Tom Jones in the play Tom Jones. And all the girls thought that was pretty cool. So I never had a better time in my life, and I realized it was something that I was so eager to do. I couldn't wait to get to rehearsal and to work on the play. And when it was over, I was devastated. Couldn't wait for the next one to come along. And I kind of realized at that point in time that was what I wanted to do for a career. It was the only work I ever really just couldn't wait to get to. And that kind of led me in that direction.
So that was high school?
My last year in high school.
And
yes.
then you pursued it into college?
Into community college for a couple of years, yeah, and I continued to have success then. That was mostly musical theater back then. And then after 2 years of community college, I took a little bit of a hiatus, and I did a whole bunch of strange things, like I was a forklift driver and a shorter cook, et cetera, et cetera. But eventually finished my 4 years of college, and then went to graduate school, and then went to postgraduate school, all as a theater major of some kind or another. In graduate school, I was a design fellow, and I was studying scenic design, and I got a scholarship to do that. And then in postgraduate school, I went back into acting at the Hillsbury Rep in Detroit, classical theater. By then, I was almost 30 years old, and it was like time to decide that you were going to do this professionally. And I immediately got my union cards at Meadow Brook Theatre outside of Detroit, and did a couple of seasons there. And then I moved to New York, where I did some work. And then after a couple of years as an actor in New York, and other in regional theater appearances, I moved to San Diego to teach, and I became the head of the theater department at United States International University, which is in Scripps Ranch. Was in Scripps Ranch, and now it's called Alante or something.
Alliance.
Yeah. And so I was there for 5 years when I moved to Laguna, and then you fill it in from there. Right.
So how did the transition from acting to directing happen? What?
In graduate school, you kind of, when you become a teacher, it's not graduate school, I shouldn't say that. It was when I became a professor. You are kind of forced to direct. The faculty always directs a play, and I found that I was pretty successful at it. And my first 3 or 4 shows were big successes, and especially at the Theater Old Town in San Diego, West Side collection of West Side Story that I did that kind of took San Diego by storm. And then I found that I was enjoying it, and then when Olive hired me to direct the Hasty Heart, Torch-Song Trilogy at North Coast Rep, which was a big step for them because it was a difficult play, and it was a risk, and it was a very, very successful production, got extended, etc. And then she asked me to come on board, and I was there for 2, 3, 4 years, directed a bunch of plays for her. By that point in time, it was time for me to go to Laguna, and my experience with Olive at North Coast and my educational experience had helped me get the job in Laguna. And then it took a long time, and I didn't do it alone to build that place into a Lort theater, but it was a gradual, steady climb. Yeah.
And you met your wife, Sarah, doing theater, or you met her before that?
And when I was an undergraduate finishing my bachelor's degree, her parents were my theater teachers.
Oh.
And I met them and I knew them for a year before I knew her, because she was in Italy doing a year abroad. And her father was the pianist and the music director for the musicals, and her mother was the choreographer and director. And I was the star pupil. And so they were telling her about me for a year before I even met her.
So it was an arranged marriage.
Yeah, kind of.
I didn't know you were religious, Andy. So you ran Laguna for almost
19 years.
19 years. And you saw it go from a company that was semi-professional?
When I first got there, it was a very highly exalted community theater with a budget of over $1 million, and they used equity guest artists semi-regularly, 1 or 2 per show, and we carried that into a contract with equity where we would use at least 2 guest artists and a stage manager. Then we got a letter of agreement, reference to LORT, and built it up from there. In about 10 years, I mean, about 5 years after I got there, 6 years after I got there, we were LORT D, and we built it up to LORT B. Equity helps you climb that ladder if you have aspirations. And we got to LORT B, and by the time we were at our peak, we had a budget of over $7 million. That's gone back down a little bit with the recession in 2008, but they're building it back up, and they're doing pretty well. I still work there a lot. I still direct plays there and act there. Pretty much every year. So
right, it's run now by our friend Annie Wareham, right?
Annie Wareham, yeah. Rode bikes with her at the beach last week. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So while you were there for your 19 years, if I say, what show jumps to your mind first? What production from the 19 years at Laguna?
The most fun I ever had directing a play there was Red Herring, Michael Hollander. It was just the laughter that fell off the pages of that, very similar to that one that you just did, The Outsiders, or Laughter on the 23rd Floor. Every 4 lines was something that was a joke that you got to commit. And they weren't just punchlines. They weren't Neil Simon jokes. They were character laughs that came out of knowing who these people were. And I think I laughed so hard in the course of rehearsing that production that I will never forget it. That was one of my favorites. Yeah, definitely.
What about, without looking for names or blaming anybody, but what was a difficulty? What was something that you went through that was a big challenge and really difficult to get through as an artistic director running a LORT theater? Well,
the recession in 2008, we lost some senior staff in the course of that, and the board of directors sort of rallied around saving the theater and made some rather harsh cuts that I didn't necessarily agree with, but that probably turned out to be the right thing to do. And I just felt that after 20 years that it was becoming more and more of a challenge for me I didn't want to fight with them, but I didn't want to just do everything they were telling me to either. And so I thought that it might be the best time to just sort of, have a nice peaceful departure and give them time and let them prepare to succeed me. And it all worked out pretty well, actually. And there was no hard feelings. Like I said, I still work there a lot. So,
well, Laguna Playhouse's loss was North Coast Rep's gain, because you've now done how many shows for us down here since you left Laguna?
Oh, like 6 or 7.
I think it's more than that.
Is
if
it?
You count the acting.
Oh yeah, including the acting. Yeah, probably 10. Yeah.
Because you come back to act. I mean, when you were at Laguna, you acted occasionally. Is that correct?
Yeah, every couple of years I would act in a play Laguna just to just remind them that I could do it.
Right.
So that people don't forget that I started out as an actor. But I think I did five plays there in the 20 years. And generally it was only when we really had trouble casting something. And the directors would look at me and go, "Can you do this?" And I'd say, "Yeah." So I never really chose anything for myself to do there, but yeah. And I enjoy acting. I enjoy the process of acting, and I've enjoyed acting at North Coast Rep. Frankly, I enjoy freelance directing and freelance acting without the responsibility of having the whole weight of the organization on your back. It's freedom. It's just wonderful. I'm old enough to be collecting Social Security. I'm semi-retired, as it were, But so I'm not so worried about having a weekly paycheck. But I think that the freedom that comes along with that has been just really wonderful for me. I mean, I love being in Amadeus. I absolutely loved it. And I had a small part, so it was one of the smaller parts in the play, but I absolutely adored that experience. And I love doing Faded Glory, and I've been having nothing but fun, you know. So
yeah, and you just directed recently for us
Bloomsday,
which was a beautiful,
terrific
beautiful production.
Yeah.
You had a great cast.
I did.
So talk about the different kind of satisfaction that you get from being an actor as opposed to being a director. Now that you're not being an artistic director anymore, and you're kind of acting sometimes and directing sometimes, what's the difference?
Well, I think that, you know, I recently directed something that I really, really enjoyed, was a production of Jane Austen's Emma, the musical, at the Ensemble Theatre Company in Santa Barbara. And we were in tech, and the actors were sitting around, and we were doing our final dress rehearsals. And I looked at the actors at one point, they're all waiting for notes. And I looked at a couple of them, I said, I'm just getting angry at you right now. And they went, why? I said, because I'm jealous, because I want to be in the play with you, and I'm not. And I have to watch it float out, you know, to see without me right now. And that is the one part of directing I don't like, is because I feel so connected to what's going on from point one to opening night, and then you kind of have to let yourself go. But part of the problem with the schedules, the way they work these days, is the closer you get to opening, when you're in preview week, you have less time to give notes to the actors when you need that time the most. In the last couple of days before you open is when the stage manager says to you, sorry, you can't give notes today because you had 2 shows this afternoon. And you're like, these are the notes I need to give right before I open, but I'm not allowed to talk to the actors. That is frustrating. As an actor, on the other hand, I don't have to worry about anything. And it's not my responsibility whether the show's any good or not. It's just my responsibility to make sure that my part of the show is as good as I can make it. And I try not to judge everything else that's going on around me. That's not always possible to do. I mean, we're humans. We judge even if we keep it to ourselves. But nonetheless, that freedom is a little bit different than carrying the responsibility of the whole show. It's a trickle-down thing. It's like when you're artistic director, you've got the whole organization in your hands, and you feel that responsibility. When you're the director, you got the whole production in your hands, you feel that responsibility. When you're an actor, you got your part in mind and what you have to do, and that's helpful. And you know, when I was teaching, I always told my students that the hardest thing about acting is dealing with directors, and the hardest thing about directing is dealing with actors. And that's 2 things that they can't really teach you in college. They can't teach you any of that stuff until you go out in the world and get the experience to understand how to deal with it. And so I always try to teach my acting students to be director-proof, which means make a strong choice. And if the director tells you you need to make another strong choice, then do so. But if you lock into your initial choice because it's what you first had in mind, therefore it must be brilliant, then that's where you're going to get in trouble. And for directors, the same thing is true. You might have an idea how you want something to occur, and then a good actor stands before you and does it differently. It's helpful for a director to say, you know, I hadn't thought of that. That's a pretty good way of looking at it. So if you could keep that sort of frame of mind from either of those 2 directions, you'll probably succeed over time, and you won't be labeled as a guy who's difficult to work with. And you know, I've had my moments. When I was a young director, I don't think I knew this as well as I know it now, and I probably struggled with actors more than I do today. You know, it's like I had it in my head that it needs to be done this way when I was in my 20s to be first directing plays, and I don't understand why you can't understand my genius. But that I learned over time to to absorb what the actors are giving me and meet them in the middle and have a pretty strong idea and know what I want the play to say, but not necessarily what I want every actor to do in every moment. And I think that was just a matter of maturing. And I think it's the first lesson young directors need to learn, I think. And I've also, another theory is that directing can be learned, but it can't really be taught. In other words, you know, this is something I learned a long time ago. You can learn directing by osmosis, by being around good directors, by being an actor in a play with good directors, or by studying what plays do and how they work. But it'd be pretty hard to take a class and have a teacher teach you how to direct a play. You can learn the basics that every textbook has about, you know, how rehearsal works and how a tech works and everything like that. But until you've been there and done it a number of times, it's pretty hard to say that you know it. It'd be impossible to teach it to somebody without all of that experience. That's
navigating all those personalities in the room.
Absolutely.
That you understand psychology.
And as you and I both know, the designers are the biggest divas in the whole group. So when you get
not my group. My group is
when you get into tech.
I'm doing a conversation with my designers coming up next week, and actually they're not.
Well, you're right. Your designers are not.
We have a pretty good team.
In the past, that's been my experience.
But that's kind of what I was getting to. We tend to work with people that we know and have had good experiences with over and over again because we have developed a shorthand.
Absolutely.
We've developed a way to understand each other more easily.
Marty's the perfect example of that.
Marty Burnett, our great set designer.
Yeah, and nobody knows that building and what it can do better than he does. You know, how many plays? 200? Is that what I saw?
It'll be 200 coming up in 2 shows. It'll be his 200th consecutive design. Ghost Rep. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And I've got some designers that I just want to work with repeatedly because we just don't have to have arguments about anything. It's like, here's how it works.
It's true of actors too, right?
Yes, it is true of actors. It is absolutely true of actors. You could save so much time. What's happened over the last 30 years is theater rehearsal periods have been just truncated. They've gone from 4.5 or 5 weeks down to 2.5 or 3 weeks in order to save money for nonprofit theaters. As a result, when you're working with actors, the first 2, 3, 4, 8 days of working with an actor is just like boxers trying to figure each other out, you know, even though it's not combat. And as a metaphor, you're still trying to understand them so you know how to deal with them. And the reverse is true. You waste an awful lot of time just trying to learn about a stranger that you don't know. I mean, granted, there's a lot of time-honored relationship things between directors and actors that make it easier. We don't have to explain to an actor what rehearsal means or what blocking means or what tech means for the most part. And so as a result, everybody understands those things. But when it gets to how detailed you can be when you make a suggestion to somebody or how they respond to something like that, or how quickly they can get off of the script and get their lines in their heads, it takes time and patience to learn that about people. And if you've got somebody that you already worked with a number of times, you know exactly what they're going to do. They know exactly what your bedside manner is going to be. And you save a week out of those 3 weeks of rehearsal dealing with people that you've worked with before. And it's also helpful that with young actors being better trained, if they are well trained, and believe me, I look at their training when I see a young actor's resume, the kids in Bloomsday, for example, and they just hit the ground running, and there's no issues there at all. So there's a lot that goes into try to squeeze a rehearsal period into 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, and tech into 2 or 3 days, and then 2 or 3 previews, and bam, there you are in front of the critics. So it's helpful that everybody kind of knows how it's all supposed to work. And it's helpful to have relationships that have been, formed over a long time.
Right. You were talking a little bit about the director, kind of at opening night, you're pretty much done.
Yeah.
And, one of my favorite things about being in the theater is the family and the relationships that you develop with the people that you're working with, who are usually creative, smart, engaged people. And as a director, I often find, and as an artistic director even more so, that I excuse myself from all of the social events when the cast goes out after a rehearsal, because if I'm there as the director, and especially as the employer, as much as they like me and they respect me and they invite me to come, if I'm there, it puts a censure on what's actually discussed.
I agree.
They can't do the bitching they need to do.
I agree. I absolutely agree with that. And that goes back to when I was a teacher. And you just don't go anywhere near students off of that campus. You just don't go anywhere near them. And you're right. Once a show opens, I don't mind having a party with them and hanging out with them and all of that. But when you're in rehearsal, it's tough to socialize with them. You really do have to keep a little bit of distance. And you're right. It's awkward for you and it's awkward for them to have you.
They have to have permission to go off and complain about what you're doing too.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you're going to complain about what they're doing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are humans after all, you know. And I can also say that I've never had a play that opened that I didn't wish I had another 3 or 4 rehearsals for. You know, there's always no, that's not true. I have to say that's not true. There has been a couple of times where I would hold up my legal pad and show it to the actors and it would be empty and say, I had no more notes to give. I've given them all. So you guys go have a good time.
That's great.
And you know, that's happened a couple.
That's the rarity, though, right?
Yeah, it is the rarity.
You want more time, because I always say you don't want me to come back and see the play.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm just going to have notes that I can't give you.
Or what we say, we go back once a week to take out the improvements.
Right, exactly, exactly. So Andy, anybody that knows you or has worked with you knows that I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Anybody that knows you or has worked with you knows that you love to tell jokes. You got one?
Oh yeah. About the guy that went to his doctor and he said, Doc, you got to help me. I'm turning into a moth. The doctor says, you're not turning into a moth. He goes, no, I am. I'm turning into a moth. The doctor says, no, listen, trust me. You're not turning into a moth. And even if you thought you were turning into a moth, you need to see a psychiatrist. I'm a general practitioner. What'd you come to me for? And he goes, well, your light was on. So,
tell me the one about the fire in the Irish bar. That's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah. There's a big fire in a pub in Dublin, and the firemen go in there and they pull out this one little guy, and he's got smoke coming out of his hair, and he's all charred. And the fireman says, "How did it start?" He goes, "Well, I couldn't tell you. It was going fairly well when I arrived." So there you go. There's 2 jokes.
So Andy, you've been doing this a long time. Why does it still turn you on?
I started doing this when the Dead Sea was only nursing a slight cough.
Okay, we're past the jokes now.
It does, and like you say, it's more about the people involved than it is necessarily about the work. I mean the play, because I don't get to necessarily choose what the play is going to be or how the play is going to be. I either like plays or I don't. You know, but I can't rewrite them in the process. But there's something about creating action or shaping action, and as much as the director is allowed to, because at some point the actor has to take over. But that shaping a 2-hour action that is kind of omniscient. It's a great feeling to look at something that's happening for 2 hours and say, I kind of created that. I kind of made that the way it is, and that's like life. And that action is a metaphor for something, and it has meaning that either is or isn't powerful in the course of whatever the play is. But the idea that I was part of the creation of a 2-hour action that has meaning just never gets boring for me, ever.
What do you hope people remember about you as a theater artist that you brought to bear?
Well, over time, I've come to know that theater is ethereal and ephemeral. That people don't remember a play that I directed 15 years ago. They might, a handful might, and my plays that I directed and or produced, and there was hundreds of them at Laguna Playhouse, have played to millions of people, and some of them might have just etched themselves indelibly in people's hearts and minds. But for the most part, they're long gone and forgotten. They're not like films. They happen and then they disappear. When you recognize that, when you come to that conclusion that the work that you've done is going to be gone soon, never to return, and unless in some horrible form like an archival video from the back of the auditorium or something, that the thrill of the moment then becomes a philosophical thing to you. That the idea that you're in it as it's happening, and that's more as an actor for me than even as a director, but both, and it becomes that much more important and that much more thrilling. And if you ever take that for granted, you should probably go into another field.
Yeah, the now.
Yes,
the
idea that people aren't going to remember this in a few years, and it's happening right now.
But what happens now is so full and so powerful, and so life affirming, and raising up what we are as human beings for that moment in the theater. It reminds you of what being alive is.
And it's a lot like solving a little problem for a lot of people. rather than trying to change the world. It's just saying, well, we got a couple of thousand people to maybe rethink a few little things because they enjoyed this experience. And if you do that hundreds and hundreds of times, you've had some effect that you can't quantify, but you've had some effect on a lot of people. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me.
If you're doing good plays. If you're just fooling around with schlock, maybe you're amusing some people, and that got its place too. But for the most part, good plays have some sort of meaning to people.
Well, I'm happy to say that you and I are going to be continuing these discussions for a bunch of years to come as we meet, and you enjoy your perfect Manhattans, and I drink my soda water.
I'll meet you at PJ's when they reopen.
There we go. There we go. I so appreciate you doing this today and sharing this with our audience, and I will see you really soon, I hope.
I hope, yeah. Well, thanks, David, and good luck with these. I'm enjoying watching them. It's been great fun. Yeah.
Good. Well, fun. I'm having. I mean, it's giving me something to do, and the feedback I'm getting is great. So we're going to do a bunch more of these.
Okay. Well, my best to your family, and give my best to everybody, Chris and Aaron, and everybody at the theater.
I will. Thank you for doing it.
Okay. Thanks, David.